All right, let me start this presentation with some nice aerial views of a city, a rural location, as well as a central station. And those weren't actually aerial views, those were video game screenshots. So I want to give you an introduction on video games, specifically city building or city sim games. So as for the history, they are considered games. They're not accurate simulations. That's not the goal. The goal is always the gaming, the fun aspect. So the major release was SimCity in 1985. And that was based on a book called Urban Dynamics by J.W. Forrester, which was published even earlier in 1969. And what that means is it's based on a mathematical and neoliberal model. And that basically means, and in this book specifically, good cities can be calculated perfectly and top-down planning solves all problems. And that's why in this game you are the mastermind, you do and plan everything. And the citizens aren't necessarily actors or don't have any agency in that sense. Also, it's a very US-centric approach, and sadly that is still very common in the genre today. Now, they're considered games, so as for playing, there's three main types of players. Those that play the game according to rules, just play the game. Those that build beautiful and realistic cities, they usually don't focus on budget or the game rules. They use settings or modifications to disable certain game mechanics. Or one-to-one recreations of real cities. That's where it gets really into the minute details. So sure, sometimes they disable features or settings, but they all still use the same game, the underlying game simulation. Now, what is the simulation? Let me get into the newest entry in that city sim genre, and that is called CitiesSkylines 2. Now, the game does real-time calculations. You have an immediate calculation and an immediate feedback. There's no delays. It's calculated in milliseconds, and that includes the day and night rhythm. There's seasons. The seasons affect the weather. So temperature, even precipitation, wind, that kind of stuff. And that all has effects on other game aspects. There's also groundwater as well as surface water. Now, one interesting thing in that newest entry is they use agents. Now, previously, the city sim games were based on grids and tiles, basically like a giant, very beautiful Excel sheet. So the tiles are basically grids with data, and the game does field-based calculations. And if you click, for example, here in the bottom right and in red, on that, that might be my camera. Now, if you click on that, it basically just gives you that info view. That was pretty common until 2013, and then became rarer in that video game genre of city sim games. Just because of computing power. So nowadays we use agents, individual units, and not each tile, but rather each unit is calculated. Units can be people, buildings, goods, objects, and because it's so computationally intensive compared to just grids, that has been used in recent years much more. So for example here, that's a single citizen that you can click on and select, and it gives you info, rather than here's a grid, and in this house there's 20 people and the average income is this. But rather, in the newest entry, every single of these 20 tenants would be calculated, as well as the building independently. Like, what's the status of that building? Is it run down or is it very well kept? Now, let's look into the people a little more. They do age. They are born and die. They can also move in from outside. There's also cemeteries and crematoria, so death care. And within their life cycle, those people are categorized as either students, workers / unemployed, or pensioners. Or like if they're very small, very young, of course they're not yet students. Jobs are assigned or found based on the level of education. So level of education is also calculated. There's income, which means wages, or even unemployment benefits or pensions. There's health, and that depends on the quality of care, as well as the distance of that healthcare building to the person. And people aren't just viewed through the lens of the individual, but also they live in households. So there's mother, father, there's children, and that all is calculated as well. Like they live together, and then university students, they move out, that kind of stuff. So it's not only the single individual, but also households are calculated as well. Now let's look into how the economy works in that Cities Skylines 2 game. There's supply chains, so 1 or 2 items can be processed into another item, and there's varying production times, and that production time is not only based on the good, but also on the efficiency of the building, like how well is it supplied with electricity? Do we have blackouts? How well educated are the workers? Also, we have commodity prices. There's the purchase price, also the logistics price, depending on the distance, as well as the type of transport, like rail, ship, trucks, and so on, as well as the wages that have to be paid to produce one good out of another. And as I said, efficiency, that's based on like the municipal budget. Sure, it's a kind of gamey system. Like if you increase your city budget for production efficiency, like that is just a flat percentage modifier in game, kind of. It's somewhat gamey because it has to be fun primarily. But also, as you can see here, employee availability and satisfaction. Like if your people are very unsatisfied because of high crime, the trash is not getting picked up, they won't be as productive, and that all like feeds into each other in the game loops, right? Now, how do people and goods get somewhere? Like how does traffic work? So first of all, let's look at the routing calculation. We have house to work and back, of course. People move from work to the shops afterwards and then move home, or they move from work to like a leisure place, or they just go shopping from their house or leisure and back, of course. Now, one interesting thing is there's no house-to-house visits. Like no one will visit their grandparents, no one will visit friends, no one will do whatever kind of stuff that you have to do at another person's house. So these are the routes that we have. How are they calculated? So the routes consist of nodes and segments. So a node might be an intersection, and a segment might be a stretch of road. And before that person starts to get somewhere, there are different routes that are calculated, and those routes are awarded points. And the lowest number of points, the routing cost, wins. The points are awarded depending on the number of intersections. So you want to have as few as possible, for example, or the sections of the route with traffic jams. What is the average speed of the segment? Like what is the cost for fuel or public transportation, and what's the travel time? And one interesting thing here is the calculation is also based on the preference depending on the age cohort. So for example, pupils and students, they prefer the cheapest travel option. They accept small detours. Now the working population, they prefer the fastest route. They just have to get to work. And pensioners, they prefer the most comfortable route. For example, as you can see here, better bus shelters. So in the top right here, it says comfort 40 points. And the regular bus stop, no shelter, no seats, no nothing. That's just a quarter of that. That's just 10 comfort points. Or for example, they don't like sharp corners. They don't like having as many intersections on their way when they get somewhere. Interestingly, that leads to induced demand. So that is calculated in the game as well, indirectly, because if there's no parking availability, there's traffic jams, there's crowded and delayed public transport, that is all calculated, and indirectly that mimics induced demand. Now, another interesting aspect for us geographers and urban planners is like, how does it look when it comes to, sure, the game looks nice, we can look at pretty cities, right? But you can also look at aerial views. But how do they work with data, the underlying data? So let's look at UI and UX, so user interface and user experience. I have a short snippet of an in-game scene right here, and those are the so-called info views. So the next one, that is going to be traffic flow. As you can see, some roads are a little heavy on traffic, intersections might be blocked. Here we have electricity availability, like is every house supplied? Where does water and sewage go? Do we have a water treatment plant, or do we have to send our sewage to a neighboring city that has one? Healthcare and death care. And the interesting thing here, for example, for the garbage management, is we can see the individual garbage trucks moving around in real time in that overlay. And if you would click on that garbage truck, or for example on that police car right here, it would say occupancy, 1 criminal, or 40% full with garbage for the garbage truck. And it would also say time of the shift, like they're 80% into their shift. And then it's going to be nighttime, or they have to get back home, that kind of stuff, right? And basically, what that means is these info views are like layers in a GIS, but they are in real time. And they're always in 3D, like I could move the camera around in game. And interesting thing here is the third axis is mostly without additional data. So it's just a pretty in-game thing, right? The visualization is often linked to tables and graphs. Like if you click on something, or as you were able to see in the video that I just showed, you would have the in-game view with the pretty colors and whatever, but on the left it would always give you a graph or like some kind of scale, like from red to green or stuff like that. One thing we have to consider here is these are bright and high contrast colors. So faster perception, just gameplay wise, like the person playing that game wants to look at the info view and get data quickly, and that is way more important than visual harmony. So the colors might be overly bright or very unusual combinations that we would not use in a GIS traditionally. All right, let's get a little bit more into data. So you can mouse over buildings or menus for additional information. It's very interactive. It's very responsive. And there's a separate menu that just gives you charts. It's basically just a giant ledger of information for the individual indicators, like electricity availability over time. There's always a time series, and then you can say like the last 5 years, the last month, like how was it today and how was it yesterday, that kind of stuff. And one thing that I love is if you go into the build menu and say, I want to build a new school, it automatically opens up the corresponding info view, so the education info view. And that means the influence of you just selecting, you haven't even placed it yet and found a location. It's just you in the build menu as a player. You click on elementary school and you immediately know this will influence education. Here's where the other schools are located. And it gives you a graph like availability of elementary education places, like X amount of kids. So the influence is directly clear, and we have immediate visual feedback so that we can choose a good action. Like, where do we place the school? Is it next to a residential area? Is it next to a workplace so people can drop off their kids at kindergarten or elementary school and then go to work in the office park or whatever? So those kind of things. Or are we over capacity? Like, do we need just an annex? Can we upgrade that building with just an annex? Because we need 100 more places for elementary school kids in our small town, that kind of stuff. Now, I gave you the introduction to city sim games. how can we use these city building simulation games professionally? First, let me go into the pros and cons. Cons first. It is very difficult, or sometimes just not possible, to import existing geolocational data that we have on locations or cities into the game. It's not possible. We would have to do very elaborate or like very precise one-to-one recreations. And basically into the game you can only import height maps. So we can import real JS height maps. That is pretty cool. As well as image overlays. So for example, if we have a screenshot of our street grid, we can import that into the game, adjust the scaling, and then we could just basically redraw them with the in-game road tools. But you can't just import population data, like georeference data, into the game. Also, the simulation, the capacity of school buildings, the preferences for route finding, etc. They cannot be changed directly into the game. We would have to use workarounds for that through user-made modifications, so-called mods. There's a lot of them, and a lot of them also focus on the realism aspect, so making stuff more punishing or more accurate to real life, but that is not inbuilt into the game. And then, like, getting into the mindset of how do we manage the mods? How do they interact with each other? Are they compatible? That's a whole other ballgame. So it's not super easy to just recreate your city and have it be your real life city that you live in and have it be pretty in the game, and just do some quick tests of how would you change that intersection. On the other hand, the game is very intuitive to use, even for people with zero experience in urban planning. Even the majority of the players are only players and they have no prior contact to urban planning. Also, this game has been used, and I love using it for bottom-up and community-driven participation formats, which I'm going to show in the next slide. And the cool thing that I think geographers and urban planners often miss is, like, you have a free camera movement from, like, aerial view kilometers up in the sky up to the street level. Like, you can zoom in to a single person that will fill the entire screen. Like, that's how fine you can zoom in. And it is often said that urban planning and geography, like, we look at our pretty maps and our street grids, but do we really know what stuff looks at the ground level? And it's completely free camera movement. You can just zoom in on the fly and see, yeah, okay, that bus shelter with that seating arrangement and a planter in a very nice side street, that looks good. That looks great for the people. There are some modifiers in-game, like, for example, the comfort of the bus stop if it has seating, but there's no way for the game to simulate, like, will people like that area? Is it pretty? That is one thing that is missing as well. Right, as for examples of how it has actually been used. So there's a few creations of rough ideas for district planning or road and intersection reworks. That was in Stockholm, Fisksätra, Hofsjö. They were all in Sweden. The game is produced in Sweden. But also for huge projects in Berlin and New York. And I want to show you one Berlin example. It's called the CitiesSkylines Global Build-Off. And that was done during the height of COVID in 2021. And Berlin wants to reconstruct the Weisenbrücke and redesign the surrounding districts. And they wanted to get people to hand in submissions, and they chose CitiesSkylines to do it with. So that was a cooperation between the game developer as well as the Stadtmuseum Berlin. And they said, you know what, you guys should focus on pedestrian and bicycle-friendly designs. And there's also €1,000 prize money for the best design. And approximately 20 in-game designs were handed in. And those videos, they had tens of thousands of views and stream views during the pandemic. It's a very niche, but very active community, like city sim gamers, and like leaning into urban planning and geography. There's a very, very alive niche, semi-professional audience there. Right, let's look at one of the designs. I think that might even be the one that won. So it's a 2-tiered design. One for pedestrians, one for cyclists. And it's basically like a park. So the park transitions into that bridge. And the bridge is designed to be a park as well. As I said, I have no idea if that design won. But for example, the Stadtmuseum building here, that is accurately represented. Those are real-life Berlin trams as well as the Spree ferries. And that is like a very high detail. It's high fidelity. It looks super pretty. And it kind of gives you a very accurate view of what can be achieved with redesigns. And compared to, for example, architects' drawings or just a top-down plan, I think that is a very, very cool tool. Now, for further discussion, I held that presentation at a conference, obviously, but for YouTube as well, like we can discuss in the comments. Are certain topics or indicators implemented into the game? And if they are they correctly modeled, or what are the pitfalls? I do have other videos concerning data in city sim games and what they get wrong about real-life urban planning. I can link those as well. So whether and how topics are implemented in the simulation should be discussed. Also, can we draw inspiration from the in-game UI UX for our GIS product? Are there additional possible applications besides just, getting lay people involved, or like media, very flashy events that you can do, for example, with that Berlin Bridge redesign? I mean, there was a whole concept behind it, and it was very well integrated into the actual planning progress of the Berlin Municipal Planning Office. But of course, it was like a marketing and promotive thing as well. But are there other additional possible applications? And lastly, how can we use those games to raise awareness and activate lay people, for example, via social media, and teach them planning concepts? Right. So that's the introduction for us geographers and city planners on how city planning games, city sim games work. All right, thank you.